Greetings, my fantasticos. How are you? So, another little video for you, checking in while we're all stuck at home, right? So, I've been asked from young readers, and I guess this applies to everybody though, people of all ages, advice for being a writer. So, my first piece of advice that I bet you've heard before is you have to read, right? If you don't read, it's sort of like a runner that doesn't learn to walk, or a carpenter who doesn't learn how to swing a hammer. You know, like reading is the foundation, it's the basis of writing. It gives you a sense of how a story is told. And the more experienced you get at reading, the better you get at things relating to character development, plotting, I mean, all kinds of that. I could go on for half an hour about all the reasons why you should read. But first thing, you should read. Second of all, I think this applies more to adults, but sometimes people will ask me for advice about how to be a writer, and then I talk to them a little bit, and then I realize that they like to talk about writing, they like to go to conferences about writing, they like to read books about writing, they like to have a critique group and talk to other people about writing, but they don't sit down and write. To be a writer, you must write. You have to put your butt in the chair, and you have to write for blocks of time. The other piece of advice I would give you about that is you have to allow yourself to be absolutely horrendous, terrible, boring. You've got to give yourself permission to write things that are just terrible, because it's a step on the road to success, right? Nobody achieves anything great without failing. Nobody. I promise you that even as a writer, I have failed over and over and over again. Overnight success took a very long time. Years, about 10 years. Some of you might be watching this, that might be your entire lives, right? So, advice for being a writer. Reading, writing, and then maybe some things you may not have expected. Now, if you have read Fish in a Tree, if you've read the note at the end of Fish in a Tree, you know that I was a kid who struggled in school, right? Writing and reading were not easy for me. And a big part of that was expectations. From a very young age, my teachers expected very little. And so therefore, I expected very little of myself. The first book that I ever finished, a novel, wasn't until the 6th grade. It was actually The K by Theodore Taylor, which is up there. But I was a really creative kid, right? So I was not devouring books. But I used to read a lot of magazines. Does that count as reading? Of course it counts as reading. I don't think that I realized I was reading as I would read all those magazines. The other thing is I loved puzzle books. I loved drawing. Okay, I would draw for hours. I would draw all the time. And what I would do is I would take blankets and I would cover our dining room table. And I would use multiple blankets so that the blankets draped over the sides of the table and covered all 4 sides, right? So I had a little cave. And I had a bunch of pillows in there, and I had, I had some magazines, I had books, I had paper, crayons, I had all kinds of things, and I would sit in there. It's like my little getaway. And a couple of things that I used to do is I used to love to cover the paper with crayon, right? So I wouldn't do just a section, I would do the entire piece of paper. You take all different colors, you can do all different shapes, you do circles and triangles and all kinds of things. The only thing you have to do is that you have to really push hard, okay? The crayon really has to be nice and dark. Then I would once I covered the entire paper with all different colors, I would then take a black crayon and I would cover the entire paper with a black crayon. So the whole paper is covered in all these different colors and then black crayon on top of it. And then, I apologize ahead of time, moms and dads, for this, but I would then take a fork And I would scratch designs. Okay, so you're just going to have to look at the top of my head for just a second. Let's see. While I'm doing this, I'll see if you can. Let's play a guessing game. I am going to write the name of a character from one of my books that is 12 letters long. 12 letters long. First and last name. First name is 6 letters. Last name is 6 letters. While I'm writing it, see if you can guess who that is. Do, 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 do. Ooh, this is pretty. So you can write messages. You can do curly cues like I'm doing. You can do suns. I mean, you could do anything. And you just use a single prong like you would like the tip of a pen or a pencil, and you scratch through the black. So there we go. Albert Dubois from Fish in a Tree. 12 letters. So I used to love to do this. And sometimes what I would do is I would make mazes. So I would cover the whole thing in black. And they took me a really long time because they were very complicated mazes. I also love to do mazes with pencil and paper and a ruler because I wanted nice straight lines, you know, and you draw a line across the top and you leave a space, and in the line you leave another space. And I would do very complicated mazes. The other thing that I used to like to do is I love to play cards. I used to play cards with my grandmother all the time. And so I used to love to design face cards like kings, queens, and jacks. So I would draw a rectangle, and I remember I would start with the crown. So I'd start at the top and have 2 lines that came down like this and went across, and then I would go from there and do the face. Now, this is very important. I was not a good artist. Okay, I'm going to be honest with you. When I was in the 2nd grade, they said I was a gifted artist at school. When I was in the 3rd grade, they said I was a gifted artist at school. But the problem is that by the time I got to be in the 7th grade or the 8th grade, I'd kind of stopped progressing. My drawings looked a lot like they did when I was in the 2nd and 3rd grade. So I am not a good artist. That's not the name of the game when it comes to art. But I love it. I love to draw. And the thing is this has to do with being a writer, right? Creativity leads to more creativity. So I'm a big believer in drawing and using clay, you know, Play-Doh, all that stuff. It's all really good. Okay, so I like to do that. And then another thing that I used to love to do. Are you ready? Are you ready? I do believe that this toy had a big part in me becoming an author. So if you're home and you don't want to sit down and write a big long story, that's okay. I mean, there's a time to write down stories, but Legos. Legos. Now, I was not a kid who read well or was a good writer, right? So when I was home and I had free time, I played with Legos all the time. And I know that my writing career began with Legos. Because what do you do when you play with Legos, right? You create characters. You create setting. Now, my mother used to let me have the top of the dining room table. You see that I had the bottom because I had the blankets over the top. But I had a train set and Legos. Those are the only 2 toys I had. And I had the train set going around the perimeter of the dining room table. And then I filled the rest of the table with Lego buildings. And when I ran out of Legos, I used macaroni and cheese boxes, cereal boxes, tape, popsicle sticks, stuff that I found in the basement of the apartment building that we lived in. So I made this big city. And then I had a pet hamster. So his name was Yu-Yu. I don't know why, but Yu-Yu the hamster, I would drop him under the table and he would run. He would run through the city. He would knock down all the Lego people, and I would narrate this. I would stand there saying, run, run, Rebecca, and I would give the hamster various names, Hufflepuff popped into my head, but I think that name has been taken. But anyway, I would narrate the story as the hamster ran around knocking things over. I would give, character names, character traits. That was the beginning of storytelling. And that began when I was very young. And I was still playing with Legos when I was, 13, 14 years old. I loved Legos. I still love Legos. So I'm a big believer in just, being creative and doing a lot of things. Another thing that I really love to do is I love to make paper airplanes. And I like to try to design my own paper airplanes. So this actually just popped into my head. It'd be very hard for me to make one, but maybe I'll do another video where I show you my most favorite paper airplane. This baby flies a really long way. But if you know how to make the basic paper airplane, you can experiment with that. I used to experiment. I used to cut little fins on the backs of the planes. I used to fold some of them, some of the paper up and some of the paper down, and see how that would affect, the way they flew. Sometimes it would make the planes do loop-de-loop. Sometimes it would make them go farther. Sometimes they dive bomb into the floor right away, and I think, so that's not a good plan. But again, creativity. So it's really important, you guys, while you're home, to challenge those brains. Don't be the potato who's sitting, staring at the TV. Watch some things that are going to really get your brain going. There's so much cool history. Okay, so something that popped into my head. Why would an army create a whole bunch of inflatable tanks? Why would an army that's at war create inflatable tanks? That doesn't make any sense. What are you going to do with an inflatable tank when you are in battle? Okay, so during World War II, the United States Army created inflatable tanks. They also created fake paratroopers, which are the soldiers that jump out of the planes with the parachutes. They're called paratroopers. And leading up to D-Day, which was, you might have heard of D-Day. That's when the United States and the Allies came to the beaches of Normandy, France, to try to push the Nazis back. And the United States and England and other allies knew that if the Germans knew they were coming, they would be beaten. So they created a whole bunch of inflatable tanks and put them on another coast. I should have looked up the details of this but this popped into my head. But you can look this up. You can Google this, right? They had paratroopers coming out of airplanes. They weren't real people. They were dolls with parachutes. But the Germans thought that the Allies, the United States and the Allies, were preparing for an invasion. So they moved a lot of their patrols and their equipment to this other location. That's really cool, and you might not have ever heard that before. So there's a lot of really, really cool stuff out there. Like, for example, how come when you turn on a light, right, the inside of a light bulb gets super hot? How come it doesn't catch on fire? I mean, why wouldn't it just catch on fire? Because oxygen feeds fire. So light bulbs are filled with gases that do not feed fire. Like argon is one, and I'm sure that there are others, but argon is the only one I can think of right now. So, I mean, just the stuff around you, the way that things work are so cool. So I challenge you to grow your brains, to be creative, to do some drawings and some paper folding, design some cool airplanes. I used to like to design paper boxes too. Fold paper in such a way that I could make cubes and rectangular cubes and that kind of thing. So So that was a long video to give you advice on, being a writer. But that stuff that I mentioned about, history and looking into things that you may not know, that stuff is super important as a writer. As a writer, it's also super important to just be observant. Like when you go into a store, have you ever noticed somebody that they said something, but their actions did not fit what they said? So, for example, maybe they spoke in a really angry way, but their body language said that maybe they were feeling some other emotion besides anger. These are the kinds of things that writers look for. Certain phrases. When somebody's behavior doesn't fit a situation, something that you'd expect. All of that helps you become a writer. So, I don't know. I think I'm rambling at this point. I think it's been a long video. But if you guys have access to Twitter, I'm on Twitter. If you have access to Instagram, and you do any of these, any of these things, if you are creating paper airplanes, if you are doing any pictures that could go in the sketchbook of impossible things, which is from Fish in a Tree, tag me. Please post them and tag me. I promise you I will go look at them and answer you. So I hope you're all staying safe. I hope you're all staying home if at all possible. If you don't have to go anywhere, sometimes your parents might have to go, out to work or something, but you probably don't need to. So as I said before, the kindest thing you can do is to stay put. Please stay put. That's to protect you, but it's also to protect everybody else. So hopefully I'll see you in person, and hopefully you will do some astonishing things while you are home during this time. All right, I'm going to go. Take care.